The day my parents tried to steal my grandfather's $8 million penthouse, I was lying on my bed in my rented studio eating instant noodles out of a plastic cup. My mom's call came through at 7:42 p.m. I knew because I checked the time right before I answered, figuring I'd let it ring twice to make it look like I was busy. Her voice crackled through the speaker, that specific pitch she uses when she's excited about money. Roro, you need to come home. Your grandfather's penthouse. We figured it out. I stopped chewing. The noodles hung halfway to my mouth, steam curling around my fingers. Figured what out? Don't play dumb. The paperwork. We found a way around the trust. Just come over. We'll explain everything. She hung up before I could ask anything else. That was classic mom, drop a bomb, then disappear before you had to deal with the fallout. I read at my phone for a solid minute, watching the screen dim and go black. My reflection looked back at me from the dark glass, all sharp cheekbones and tired eyes. 26 years old, working 2 waitressing jobs, rely scraping by, and somehow still getting dragged into my family's messes. The train ride to my parents' house took 45 minutes. I spent it scrolling through the photos on my phone, the ones I never deleted even though I probably should have. There was one from 3 years ago, taken at my grandfather's 80th birthday party. He was in his wheelchair, but someone had put a paper crown on his head, and he was laughing so hard his whole body shook. My mom stood behind him, smiling for the camera, but I remembered how she'd spent the whole night whispering to my dad about property values and market timing. I locked my phone and shoved it in my pocket. My parents lived in the same house I grew up in, a worn-down split level in a neighborhood that used to be nice and wasn't anymore. The porch light was burnt out, same as it had been for the last 6 years. I walked up the cracked concrete steps and let myself in. The smell hit me first, cigarette smoke and takeout Chinese, that greasy combo that always made my stomach turn. My dad was in the living room, pacing in front of the coffee table with a cigarette wedged between his fingers. My mom sat on the couch, painting her nails a violent shade of pink. She didn't look up when I walked in. Close the door, she said. You're letting the cold in. I shut it behind me. The living room was a mess, paperwork spread across every available surface. I recognized some of it, real estate forms, notarized copies, pages with official-looking seals. My dad's pacing was making me dizzy, so I grabbed a spot on the arm of the couch and waited. My mom finished her pinky nail, blew on it, and finally looked at me. Your grandfather's lost it. Completely. The doctors said his cognition is declining, and last week he couldn't even remember my name. I saw him 2 weeks ago. He remembered mine. That's because you're the favorite. She said it like it was an accusation. But he's not going to be around forever, Roro. And when he goes, that penthouse is going to get eaten up by estate taxes unless we do something now. I looked at the papers on the table. There was a power of attorney form, partly filled out, and a property transfer document with my grandfather's signature scrawled at the bottom. Except the signature didn't look right. The loops were too clean, too steady. My grandfather's hand had been shaking for the last 2 years. Did you forge his signature? My dad stopped pacing. He turned to look at me, and there it was, that expression I'd been seeing my whole life. The one that said I was being inconvenient, that I was interrupting something important. We had him sign it last month when he was having a good day. I saw him last month. He couldn't hold a pen. It's not your concern, my mom cut in. We're his children. We have the right to manage his affairs. All you need to do is sign here. She pushed a paper toward me. It's a waiver. You're waiving your potential inheritance claim so we can handle the transfer without complications. I looked down at the paper. My name was already typed into the blank space. They'd read everything in advance. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months, and the only part they needed from me was my signature. No. My mom's hand stopped mid-air, nail polish brush hovering. Excuse me, I'm not signing anything. My dad crushed his cigarette into the ashtray. Ha rider than Nisese re, Roro, don't start with this. We're trying to protect you. You think you have any idea what happens when someone dies without proper estate planning? We're doing you a favor. You're doing yourselves a favor. There's nothing in this for me. That's not true. My mom stood up, and her nail polish bottle tipped over, rolling off the table and staining the carpet with a splotch of hot pink. We're still your parents. Whatever happens, it's going to benefit the family eventually. That includes you. Name one time something in this family ever benefited me. The room went quiet. My dad's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching in his cheek. My mom's eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into that thin line I remembered from every fight we'd ever had. The one that said she was done pretending. You think you can just come in here and judge us, she said, her voice climbing. You don't know anything. You don't know what we've sacrificed. Your grandfather had everything handed to him. A business, connections, property. We had to fight for scraps. He spent 40 years building that business. You spent 40 years complaining about what you didn't get. My dad stepped four-way road. He was taller than me by a foot, and when he got close, I could smell the alcohol on his breath. You will sign that paper, or I will make your life so difficult you'll wish you had. Are you threatening me? I'm stating a fact. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a text from the nursing home, probably their daily update. I was about to swipe it away when I saw the preview, video attachment. I tapped it without thinking that the video was only 5 seconds long. My grandfather was lying in his bed, the afternoon light falling across his face. His lips were moving, just rely, and I turned the volume up. He was saying something over and over, the same 2 syllables, his voice so soft it was almost swallowed by the hum of the machines. He was saying my name. Roro. My mom snatched the phone out of my hand. What is that? What are you watching? Give it back. She held it up, squinting at the screen. Is that from the nursing home? Why are they sending you videos? We told them to send everything to us. I grabbed the phone back, harder than I intended. My nails scraped her wrist, and she yelped, pulling her hand away like I'd burned her. The video was still playing, my grandfather's face frozen on the screen, his eyes half open and distant. I'm going to see him, I said. He's not allowing visitors today. Then I'll wait outside until he does. I turned toward the door, and that's when I heard it, a crash. My dad had swept everything off the coffee table. Papers scattered across the floor like giant snowflakes. The power of attorney form landed face up near my feet, and I could see the ink smudges on the signature line where someone had tried too hard to make it look real. You walk out that door, my dad said, his voice trembling with contained rage, and you don't come back. You understand me? You're out of this family. I've been out of this family since I was 18 years old. I opened the door. The cold air hit me, sharp and clean, and I breathed it in like it was water. Behind me, my mom was saying something, but I couldn't make out the words. The video was still playing in my head, that tiny loop of my grandfather's voice, saying my name like it was the only word he remembered how to say. I was halfway down the porch steps when the buzzer rang. I stopped. My parents stopped too. The sound came from the front gate, that old electric buzzer that rely worked anymore. My dad muttered something and pressed the intercom button. Who is it? A voice came through the speaker, calm and professional. Mr. and Mrs. Liu, this is Wei Lin from Chen and Associates law firm. I have documents to deliver regarding Mr. Chen Guodong's estate. Is this a convenient time? My mom's face went pale. My dad froze, his fingers still pressing the intercom button. I looked at both of them, then back at the front gate. Through the metal slats, I could make out the silhouette of a man in a dark suit. I'll get it, I said. Don't you? My mom's hand grabbed my arm, fingers digging in. Don't you let him in. I shook her off, harder than I meant to. Her hand dropped away, and I walked past my dad, past the scattered papers, past the coffee table with its overturned ashtray and spilled nail polish. I opened the front door and stepped out into the night. The man at the gate was younger than I expected, maybe RLY 30s, with Shaw RP features and a worn leather briefcase. He wore a suit that looked expensive but comfortable, the kind that fit well without trying too hard. He smiled when he saw me, a small, refill smile. "Ms. Roro, that's me." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This came directly from Mr. Chen's private attorney. He instructed me to deliver it to you personally. No one else." I took the envelope. It was thick, heavy paper, and when I turned it over, I saw my name written on the front in shaky, uneven handwriting. The letters were slanted and barely legible, but I knew that handwriting. I'd known it since I was 6 years old, learning to trace my ABCs. My grandfather had written this. He'd held a pen, steadying his shaking hand, and written my name. "What is this?" I asked. "Of your grandfather's wishes." "That's all I can say." He glanced past me toward the house, where I could hear my mom's voice getting louder. "I'd read it somewhere private, if I were you." "And Ms. Lu, the lockbox?" He mentioned something about a lockbox. "Lockbox," he said, "you'd remember. You used to play there." He tipped his head, a small gesture, and then he turned and walked back toward his car. "Good luck, Ms. Lu. You'll need it." I watched him drive away. The headlights cut through the dark, then disappeared around the corner. I was alone on the porch, the envelope in my hands, the sound of my parents arguing through the walls behind me. I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The words were written in that same shaky hand, and it had taken him a long time to write them. I could tell from the way the ink pooled in some places, like the pen had paused for too long. Roro. "The apartment is yours. They want what I built, but I built it for you. There's a key under the shoe cabinet by the elevator. The one with the red string. You used to play in the walls, remember? That's where the real things are. I love you. I've always loved you." The street lamp buzzed overhead. I folded the letter carefully, pressed it against my chest, and felt the weight of it, this impossible weight of a man who couldn't speak but had found a way to speak anyway. I looked back at the house. My mom had opened the door now, her face twisted with something I couldn't name. My dad stood behind her, his arms crossed, his jaw still tight. "Roro," my mom said. "Who was that?" I smiled. I didn't mean to, but it happened anyway, this slow, crooked smile that felt more like a sob than anything else. "A lawyer," I said. "Grandpa's lawyer." My mom took a step toward me. "What did he give you?" I tucked the letter into my jacket pocket, close to my heart. "Just a key." I turned and walked away, and I didn't look back. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and I walked through them one by one, toward the subway station, toward the elevator, toward the shoe cabinet with its secret underneath. I could feel my grandfather's letter through the fabric of my jacket, warm against my chest. I didn't know what I was going to find in that penthouse. But I knew, for the first time in my life, exactly where I was going. The train ride to the city took another 45 minutes, and I spent every second of it with my hand pressed over that letter. People looked at me strangely, the girl with the torn jacket and the trembling fingers, clutching a piece of paper like it was made of glass. I didn't see when the elevator doors opened on the 46th floor, the hallway was silent. The penthouse door loomed in front of me, all dark wood and brass fixtures. I'd only been here a handful of times, always with my parents, always under their watchful eyes. But this time was different. I walked to the shoe cabinet. It was dark brown, old-fashioned, with brass handles shaped like leaves. I knelt down and ran my hand along the bottom edge, my fingers brushing against yards of dust. And then I felt it. Cold metal. A loop of string. I pulled it out. It was a key, small and tarnished, attached to a red cord tied in a complicated knot. The knot was uneven, clumsy, like it had been tied by hands that didn't work the way they used to. But I recognized it. My grandfather had taught me that knot when I was 8 years old. The safe and sound knot, he called it. He said as long as I could tie it, I'd always find my way home. I held the key up to the light and turned it over. On the back, scratched into the metal with a sharp object, was a number. A lockbox number. My heart slammed against my ribs. I looked up at the penthouse door, then back at the key in my hand, then at the wall where I remembered the secret space, the little hiding spot I'd discovered when I was 6, playing hide and seek while my parents argued in the kitchen. I knew where the lockbox was. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that my grandfather had been waiting for me to find it. The key fit. I stood in front of the penthouse door, the tarnished brass sliding into the lock like it had been waiting for me. The mechanism turned smooth and silent, and I pushed the door open into a darkness that smelled like cedar and old books and something else, something that might have been lavender, my grandfather's favorite scent. I didn't turn on the lights at first. I just stood there in the doorway, letting the city glow filter through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in silver and gray. The apartment was exactly as I remembered it. The same leather couch, the same Persian rug with the faded roses, the same bookshelves crammed with volumes my grandfather had read 100 times each. He never threw anything away. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The latch clicked, and the sound echoed in the empty space, too loud in the silence. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the room. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Like someone had tidied up before I got here, wiped down surfaces, folded the throw blanket over the back of the couch. I walked through the living room, past the dining table where we'd had so many holiday dinners, past the kitchen with its marbly countertops and copper pots hanging from hooks. I'd always thought this place was too fancy for him, for a man who ate instant noodles in his pajamas and drank tea from a chipped mug. But that was the point, I realized. He didn't live here to impress anyone. He lived here because he could. The hallway led to the bedrooms. I passed the guest room, the study, and stopped at the door to the master suite. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible through the crack. I pushed it open slowly, the old hinges groaning. The room was empty. The bed was made, the pillows fluffed, the curtains drawn. His wheelchair sat in the corner, folded and covered with a sheet. I looked at that wheelchair and felt something catch in my throat. 3 years he'd been in that chair, 3 years of watching my parents circle like RKS, waiting for the final breath. I walked to the closet. The door was heavy, solid wood, and when I pulled it open, the scent of his clothes hit me, that mix of laundry detergent and the cheap cologne he'd been using since before I was born. I reached inside and pressed my palm against the back wall, the same way I'd done when I was 6 years old. The wall was solid. I pressed harder. Nothing. I stepped back, frowning. Had I remembered wrong? I'd been so sure it was here, the hidden space behind his closet wall, the secret compartment where I used to hide from my parents during their fights. I'd crouch there in the dark, listening to their voices rise and fall, and my grandfather would stand guard outside, telling them I'd gone home. But that was 20 years ago. He might have sealed it up, remodeled, moved things around. Then I remembered the key. The lockbox number scratched into the back. I pulled it out of my pocket and held it under the flashlight beam, squinting at the tiny digits engraved in the metal. 0417, it could have been a date. It could have been a combination. But as I read at it, something clicked. April 17th. His birthday. The lockbox wasn't in the closet. It was in the study. I turned and walked out of the master suite, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. The study was at the end of the hall, a small room my grandfather used to call his thinking space. It had a mahogany desk, a leather armchair, and a wall of built-in bookshelves that reached all the way to the ceiling. I'd never been allowed in here as a child. It was his private sanctuary, and I'd respected that. But now I stood in the doorway, flashlight scanning the room, and saw that the bookshelves were covered in family photos. Dozens of them, in matching silver frames, arranged in rifle rows. Me at my kindergarten graduation. Me with a missing front tooth. Me in my high school cap and gown. He'd kept all of them. I walked closer, my light catching the glass on each frame. There was a picture of me at 8 years old, grinning at the camera with a paper crown on my head and chocolate SMEA red across my cheek. He'd taken that picture on my birthday, the year my parents forgot to show up. He'd baked the cake himself, lopsided and burnt, and we'd eaten it together on the floor of this very apartment. I couldn't breathe. I tore my eyes away from the photos and looked at the bookshelves again, scanning for anything that looked out of place. A gap in the row of books. A shelf that seemed deeper than the others. I ran my hand along the spines, feeling the leather bindings and the rough edges of old paper. Then I felt it. One of the books wouldn't slide. It was a thick, ancient-looking volume with a faded red cover, wedged into the middle of a row. I tried to pull it out, but it was stuck fast. Not stuck, attached. I pressed on the spine, and it clicked. The bookshelf swung open. I sucked in a breath. Behind the shelf was a small alcove, maybe 3 feet deep and just wide enough for a person to stand in. The walls were lined with more family photos, these ones older, yellowed with age. And at the back, sitting on a small wooden shelf, was a lockbox. It was a simple black steel box, about the size of a shoebox, with a single keyhole on the front. The numbers 0417 were engraved on a brass plate below the lock. I knelt down in front of it, the carpet soft beneath my knees, and slid the key into the hole. It turned. The lock released with a smooth, oiled click. I lifted the lid. Inside, everything was organized with the careful precision of someone who'd planned this for a long time. Thick manila envelopes, each labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. A small velvet pouch that clinked when I touched it. And on top of everything, a letter. I pulled it out and unfolded it. The paper crackled, old and brittle, and I could see the pressure marks where the pen had dug deep into the fibers. Roro, the letter began. If you're reading this, I'm either gone or not far from it. Either way, I need you to know something. I've watched you grow up in a house that didn't give you enough, and I've seen you become more than anyone expected. You are the only person in this family who has ever asked me what I wanted. I stopped reading. The words were blurring, and I realized my eyes were wet. I blinked hard and kept reading. I've kept a record of everything. Every loan your parents took from me. Every lie they told. Every time they tried to pressure me into signing things over. It's all here, in these envelopes. But that's not the important part. The important part is this. I'm giving you the apartment because I want you to have somewhere safe. Somewhere nobody can take away from you. But I'm also giving you something else. The documents in the second envelope read the deed to a small house in the countryside. I bought it 20 years ago, after I realized your parents would never give you the life you deserved. I never told anyone about it. Not even your grandmother. It's yours now. Whatever happens, you'll always have a door that closes behind you. I set the letter down, my hands shaking. The second envelope was thicker, heavier, and when I opened it, I saw the deed. A small 2-bedroom cottage, property lines drawn in neat ink, my name already filled in on the ownership transfer. He'd done this 20 years ago. When I was 6 years old. He'd bought me a house, and he'd waited all this time to tell me that. I let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. The velvet pouch drew my attention next. I picked it up and poured the contents into my palm. A simple gold necklace, a thin chain with a small locket attached. I opened the locket, expecting a photo, but inside was a tiny slip of paper, folded so small it could really be seen. I unfolded it. There were only 2 words. You belong. I sat back on my heels, the necklace dangling from my fingers, and tried to process everything. The apartment. The cottage. The records of my parents' betrayals. He had built an entire safety net, thread by thread, just for me. I was still sitting there, surrounded by the evidence of a man's love, when my phone buzzed. I checked it automatically. It was my mom, texting in all caps. Where did you go? Come back here now. I typed back 3 words. I'm at the apartment. The response came immediately. You are not allowed in there. Grandpa gave me the key, I typed. He wanted me to have it. 3 dots ape red, disape red, ape red again. Then, we'll call the police. I wanted to laugh. A real laugh, the kind that could have turned into TRS if I let it. Instead, I took a picture of the lockbox, the letters, the deed, and I sent it to her. No caption. No explanation. Just the evidence. The dots stopped. The call came less than a minute later. I let it ring that I didn't need to hear her voice. I'd heard it my entire life, and for once, I knew exactly what she was going to say, and I knew it didn't matter. I stood up, brushed off my knees, and carried the lockbox into the living room. I set it on the coffee table and pulled out the envelopes one by one, spreading them across the surface. The records went back decades. Loans that had been taken out in my grandfather's name without his knowledge. Credit cards opened under his identity. Property transfers attempted while he was in the hospital. Every single one of them had been stopped. Every single one had been documented. He'd been fighting them on his own, while lying in a bed that couldn't hold him still, while his mind slipped and his hand shook and his voice faded to a whisper. I opened the last envelope. It was thinner than the others, and inside was a single photograph. An old one, black and white, of my grandfather and grandmother on their wedding day. They were young and smiling, standing in front of a church I didn't recognize. She was in a simple white dress, and he was in a suit that didn't quite fit. On the back of the photo, in my grandmother's handwriting, were the words, "We built this for you." All of it. I turned the photo over and over in my hands. I'd never met my grandmother. She'd died before I was born, in a car accident that took her before she could see him build his business, before she could see him become a grandfather. But I knew stories. He told me them all the time, when my parents weren't around, when it was just the two of us. Stories of a woman who never stopped smiling, who gave him the idea for the apartment, who called their home a nest for the little ones. He'd built this for a family that never came. And then he'd waited 26 years for me to arrive. I held the photo to my chest, the same way I'd held the letter Relier. The gold necklace was still in my other hand, the chain tangled around my fingers. I looked at it and realized the clasp was broken, a delicate snap that had been mended with a tiny knot of red thread. The same red thread as the key. I laughed again, this time with tears streaming down my face. He'd fixed it himself. He'd fixed everything himself, long before I needed it. I spent the next hour going through the apartment. Not searching, not hunting for secrets, just existing. Touching things he'd touched. Standing in the kitchen where he'd made me pancakes on Saturday mornings. Opening the cabinets and finding my favorite cereal still in the same spot, even though I hadn't stayed here in years. In his closet, hidden behind a row of identical gray sweaters, I found a box of things I'd forgotten. My old drawings, crayon art of stick figures and houses with blue roofs. A failed science fair project that had gotten a C-. A bracelet I'd made him one Mother's Day because I didn't have a mom to give it to. He'd kept everything. I sat on his bed and looked out the window at the city lights. 46 floors up, and the world looked so small, so manageable. I thought about my parents in their house, their angry words spilling out into the empty rooms. I thought about the lawyer, about the evidence, about all the lies I just unraveled. And I thought about my grandfather, lying in a nursing home bed 2 miles away, with a smile that would light up whenever he saw me. I called the nursing home. It was late, past visiting hours, but they let me talk to the overnight nurse. "How is he?" I asked. "Resting comfortably," she said. "He had a good day. He ate some dinner, even smiled a little." "Can you tell him something for me?" "Of course. Tell him I found it." "I found everything." There was a pause on her end. Then, the nurse who was on shift Relier said he was pointing at the door all afternoon, like he was waiting for someone. And then he pointed at his chest and made a motion like he was hugging somebody. I closed my eyes. Thank you, I said. I'll be there tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the apartment, curled up on the leather couch with a blanket I'd found folded in a trunk. I watched the sun rise over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and I held the necklace in my palm, the broken clasp wrapped in red thread. I knew what I had to do. I just needed time to figure out how to do it. By morning, the decision was clear that I was going to give them a choice. I'd give them the evidence, all of it. And I'd give them one last chance to walk away, to let go of the money and the lies and the years of trying to take something that was never theirs to take. That I was going to be the person my grandfather raised me to be. Not a fighter, not a martyr. Just someone who could love without being broken by it. I stood at the window and watched the city wake up, and I realized for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I had a home. I had a future. And I had a man who'd spent his whole life making sure I'd be okay. I put the necklace on. The red thread rested against my collarbone, soft and warm. I was ready. I went to the nursing home first. The morning sun was still low when I walked through the automatic doors, the gold necklace warm against my skin. The receptionist knew me by now. She waved me through without checking the visitor log, and I made my way down the familiar hallway to room 217. My grandfather was awake. He was sitting up in bed, propped against a mountain of pillows, his eyes fixed on the window. The nurse had pulled back the curtains, and the light fell across his face in a way that made him look younger, softer. His hands rested on the blanket, thin and spotted, but steady. When he heard me come in, he turned his head slowly, and a smile spread across his face. It was a small smile, crooked on one side, but it reached his eyes. Those eyes that had seen so much, that had watched me grow up from a scrappy kid to a woman who still didn't quite know what she was doing. Roro, he said. His voice was a whisper, a rasp that right across the room. But I heard it. I always heard it. I crossed the room in 3 quick steps and took his hand. His fingers curled around mine, fragile but determined, and for a moment we just sat there, not speaking, the way we'd always done best. I found it, I said finally. The lockbox. The cottage. Everything. He nodded, a tiny dip of his chin. Good. Good girl. I don't know what to do next. His grip tightened, just a fraction. You know. You've always known. I looked down at our joined hands. His were so much older than mine, the veins standing out like rivers on a map. I thought about all the things he'd done for me, all the sacrifices he'd made, and I felt that familiar lump forming in my throat. You built me a whole life, I said. 20 years ago. Before I even knew what I needed. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they were shining. Had to. Couldn't let them break you. They can't break me. I meant it. You made sure of that. He squeezed my hand again, and then he let go, reaching with his other hand toward the bedside table. I watched him fumble with the drawer, his fingers clumsy but determined. He pulled out a small envelope and pressed it into my palm. It was addressed to my parents. I want you to give them this, he said. After I'm gone. My heart clenched. Don't talk like that. Roro. His voice was firm, the same voice he'd used when I was a child and had scraped my knee on the playground. I'm tired. I've been tired for a long time. But I'm not done yet. I need you to promise me. Promise you what? Promise me you'll give this to them. They need to see it. I looked at the envelope. It was sealed with wax, real wax, a deep red color that had been melted and pressed with a stamp. My grandfather's initials, etched into the center. He'd read this long ago, probably the same time he'd read everything else. Okay, I said. I promise. He nodded, satisfied, and leaned back against the pillows. His eyes drifted to the window again, where the sky was still pink with dawn. It's a good day, he said. I always loved the mornings here. I stayed with him for an hour. We didn't talk much, we never needed to. I read him the newspaper, the sections he liked, the one with the crossword puzzle he couldn't do anymore but still pretended to enjoy. When the nurse came to check his vitals, I stood up to leave, and he caught my wrist with surprising strength. "Bca refill," he said. "They're going to fight you." "I know. But you're stronger. Remember that." I leaned down and kissed his forehead. His skin was CL and papery, and he smelled like the lavender soap the nursing home used. "I'll come back tomorrow," I said. He smiled. "I'll be here." I walked out of the nursing home with the sealed envelope in my bag, the necklace heavy around my neck, and a strange sense of calm settling over me. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of my parents. Not of the fight that was coming. I had my grandfather's words, his documents, his years of preparation, and most of all, his love. I took the train back to my parents' house. The porch light was still burnt out. The lawn still had patches of brown. Everything looked exactly the same, but I felt like a different person walking up those cracked steps. I knocked this time. I didn't just walk in. My mom opened the door. She looked different too. Older, somehow, like she'd aged a decade since I'd last seen her. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes were red-rimmed, like she hadn't slept. Behind her, I could see my dad sitting on the couch, a bottle of beer in his hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Roro." My mom's voice was flat. "You came back. I told you I would." She stepped aside, and I walked into the living room. The papers from last night were still scattered across the floor, untouched. The nail polish stain on the carpet had dried into a dull pink patch. My dad didn't say anything, just took a long sip of his beer and read at me. I sat down on the arm of the couch, the same spot I'd taken last night. I pulled the envelope out of my bag and set it on the coffee table in front of me. "Grandpa asked me to give you this," I said. My mom reached for it, but I held up my hand. "Not yet. I need to say something first." She pulled back, crossing her arms. My dad set down the beer bottle with a loud thunk. "I found everything," I said. "The records. The loans. The attempts to transfer his property. I know what you did." My mom's face went pale. My dad's jaw tightened, but neither of them spoke. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to call the police or tell the lawyers or make your lives miserable. I could, but I'm not going to. That's not who I am." "Then what do you want?" My dad's voice was rough. "Hoa RSE. You came here to rub it in." "No." I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees. "I came here to give you a choice." I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was my grandfather's handwriting again, neat and refill, the way he wrote before his hands root shaking. "He wrote this years ago," I said. "He was going to give it to you himself, but he never found the right time. He asked me to deliver it." I handed it to my mom. She took it with trembling fingers, her eyes scanning the words. I watched her face change as she read, the confusion, the disbelief, and then something I'd never seen before. Something that looked almost like grief. I didn't need to read the letter. I knew what it said. My grandfather had told me, in his own way, during that quiet hour in the nursing home. "I know you've made mistakes," the letter began. "I know you've done things you're not proud of. But I also know that you're my children, and I have never stopped loving you. The money, the property, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you find your way back to each other. What matters is that you let Roro grow into the woman she's meant to be." He'd given them a way out. A door, just like the one he'd given me. He'd offered them forgiveness, and he'd left it up to them whether to take it. My mom finished reading. The papers slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. She stood there, frozen, ring at nothing. "Mom," I said softly. "He forgave you. All of it." She made a sound, a small broken noise that was half sob and half sigh, and then she crumpled. Her legs gave out and she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent crying, and my dad watched her with an expression that was slowly crumbling. I turned to him. Dad. He wouldn't look at me. Dad, please. He finally met my eyes. There was something there I'd never seen before, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the man he might have been, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike and read me bedtime stories before everything went wrong. I don't know how to fix this, he said. His voice broke on the last word. You don't have to fix it alone. I reached across the coffee table and took his hand. His palm was rough, calloused, and I realized how much he'd aged too. I'm not going anywhere. He looked down at our hands, then back at me. His eyes were wet. Roro, he said. I'm so sorry. I know. That was all I needed. Not a long speech, not a grand apology. Just those 3 words, and the sight of my mom crying on the couch, and the letter lying on the floor between us. I sat with them for a while. We didn't talk much, too much had happened, too many years of silence to fill in one afternoon. But we sat together, the 3 of us, in the same living room where I'd grown up, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a war zone. My mom finally lifted her head. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy, and she looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. What happens now? She asked. I thought about the APA it meant. The cottage. The records in the lockbox. All the things my grandfather had built for me, and all the things he'd left unfinished. Now we figure it out, I said. Together. If you want. My mom nodded slowly. My dad squeezed my hand once and let go. We were never going to be a perfect family. I knew that. There was too much history, too many wounds that hadn't fully healed. But I also knew that my grandfather's gift wasn't just the money or the property, it was this. A chance to start over. I left their house as the sun was beginning to set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the same colors I'd watched from the penthouse window that morning. I walked to the train station with a lightness in my chest, the necklace still warm against my skin. I had a lot of work ahead of me. The cottage needed repairs. The penthouse needed a lawyer. My parents needed time. But I had time. I had a home. I had a life that was finally, truly my own. I sat on the train, watching the city lights flicker past, and I thought about my grandfather. How he'd spent his whole life protecting me, preparing me, loving me in ways I hadn't understood until now. I thought about the key with the red string. The lockbox number. The cottage deed. The letter. The necklace. He'd given me everything I needed. And now I was going to use it. The next few weeks were strange. Not bad strange, just strange in the way that life gets when you've been holding your breath for years and suddenly remember how to exhale. I went back to work at the restaurant, but I didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. I route looking at the cottage online, pulling up photos of the little 2-bedroom house my grandfather had bought for me before I could even read. It was small and weathered, with peeling white paint and a porch that sagged in the middle. But it had a garden, a real one, with rose bushes that had gone wild and a maple tree that turned gold in the fall. Route making plans. My parents didn't call much, but they texted. Small things, at first. My mom sent me a picture of a cat she'd seen in the yard, and my dad asked me what I wanted for my birthday. It wasn't normal, not yet, but it was something. Progress, I called it. My grandfather would have called it a miracle. I visited him every day. He was getting weaker. I could see it in the way his hands trembled when I held them, the way his breathing came in shorter, shallower gasps. But his eyes were still bright, still sharp, still tracking my every move like he was memorizing me. I told him about the cottage. About my parents. About the plans I was making. He listened the way he always did, head tilted, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. When I finished, he reached out and touched the necklace around my neck, the one with the red thread. Good girl, he whispered. You're doing good. I kissed his forehead and promised to come back the next day. But the next day, when I walked into room 217, he was asleep. The nurse told me he'd had a rough night, that his vitals were dropping, that the doctor wanted to run some tests. I sat beside him for hours, holding his hand, watching the rise and fall of his chest. The machines beeped their steady rhythm, and I tried to match my breathing to his. I didn't leave until visiting hours ended. 2 days later, I got the call. It was the nursing home, the head nurse, her voice soft and ca-reful. Ms. Liu, I'm so sorry. Your grandfather passed away peacefully this morning. He was asleep. He didn't feel any pain. I didn't cry. Not then. I sat on the floor of my studio apartment, the phone still pressed to my ear, and I read at the wall. The grief was there, a heavy weight in my chest, but it didn't break me. It just sat there, waiting. I went to the nursing home that afternoon. They let me see him one last time, and I stood in the doorway of his room, looking at the bed where he'd lain for so long. He looked peaceful, almost young, like he'd finally let go of all the weight he'd been carrying. I walked up to the bed and took his hand. It was cold now, stiff, but I held it anyway. Thank you, I whispered. For everything. I'll take care of it. I promise. I left the room and didn't look back. The funeral was small. My grandfather had never been one for crowds, and the people who came were the ones who mattered. The lawyer, Wei Lin. The head nurse from the nursing home. A few old friends from his business days. And my parents. They sat in the back row, my mom in a black dress I'd never seen before, my dad in a suit that looked like it hadn't been worn in years. They didn't cry, not openly, but they stayed until the end. My mom came up to me afterward, her eyes red-rimmed, and she hugged me. A real hug, the kind where you can feel the other person's heartbeat. Your grandfather was a good man, she said. I wish I'd told him more often. He knew, I said. He always knew. My dad just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. But when I turned to leave, he reached out and touched my elbow. You need anything, he said. You call. Okay, I nodded. Okay. The reading of the will happened a week later. We sat in the lawyer's office, all three of us, in chairs that were too comfortable for the occasion. Wei Lin read through the documents in a calm, even voice, and I watched my parents' faces as he spoke. The apartment went to me. The cottage went to me. The liquid assets, the investments, the retirement accounts, they were divided among my parents, with a small trust set aside for any future children I might have. My grandfather had been fair. Generous, even. He'd given them enough to live on, enough to be comfortable, but he'd made sure the things that mattered, the home, the legacy, the heart of it all, stayed with me. My mom took it better than I expected. She nodded through the whole thing, her hands folded in her lap, not saying a word. My dad fidgeted with his tie, but he didn't argue. When it was over, we stood up to leave. My mom paused at the door and turned back to me. I know it doesn't fix anything, she said. But I want you to know, I'm proud of you. Your grandfather would be proud of you too. I didn't know what to say. Those were words I'd never heard from her before, and they landed somewhere deep in my chest, heavy and warm. I managed a small smile. Thank you, Mom. She nodded and walked out. After the will, after the dust settled, I threw myself into the cottage. It was a mess. The roof had leaks. The plumbing was ancient. The garden had become a jungle of weeds and overgrown bushes. But I loved it. I loved the creaky floorboards and the drafty windows and the way the morning light poured through the kitchen curtains. I loved the idea of making it mine. I spent my weekends there, scraping paint and pulling weeds and learning how to fix things I'd never fixed before. My parents came by once, my dad carrying a toolbox and my mom holding a casserole. They didn't stay long, but they helped. My dad fixed the leaky sink, and my mom planted new roses in the garden. It wasn't perfect. We still stumbled over words, still found ourselves in awkward silences. But we were trying. For the first time, we were all trying. I kept the penthouse too. I couldn't let it go, not yet. I sta root going there on the nights when the cottage felt too quiet, when I needed to feel close to my grandfather. I'd sit in his armchair and read his books and look at the photos on the shelf. I'd open the lockbox and go through the records, the letters, the tiny pieces of his life he'd saved for me. One night, I found something I'd missed before. Tucked at the bottom of the lockbox, underneath everything else, was a small leather journal. I opened it carefully, the pages yellowed with age, and sta root reading that it was my grandfather's diary that he'd sta root writing it when I was born, and he'd kept it up for years, entry after entry, recording my first steps, my first words, my first day of school. He wrote about my parents too, their fights, their disappearances, their failures. He wrote about the conversations he'd had with them, the arguments, the TRS. He wrote about the times he'd wanted to give up, to cut them out of his life completely. And then he wrote about me. Roro turned 12 today, one entry read. She asked me why her parents don't love her. I told her they do, but they don't know how to show it. I don't know if that was the right thing to say. I just know that I love her enough for all of them. Another entry, from a year later, Roro won the spelling bee. Her parents didn't show up. I sat in the front row and clapped so hard my hands hurt. She looked at me from the stage, and she smiled. That smile is the only reason I keep going. I read until my eyes burned, until the words blurred together and I had to close the journal and press it against my chest. All those years. All those tiny moments he'd recorded, the ones I'd forgotten or never knew about. He'd loved me in a way I was only beginning to understand. That a few weeks later, I went back to the nursing home to donate some of the things my grandfather had left behind. The head nurse met me in the lobby, and she handed me a small envelope. He left this with us, she said. He told us to give it to you after he was gone. He said you'd know when the time was right. I opened the envelope in the car. Inside was a piece of paper, folded into a refill squa with 2 sentences written in that familiar shaky handwriting that you have everything you need now. Take a breath. And then keep going. I sat in the parking lot for a long time, sta ring at those words. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and I thought about my grandfather's hands, his eyes, his quiet steady presence in my life. I put the paper in the glove compartment, next to the deed to the cottage. Then I sta root the car and drove home. The next weekend, I finished the last of the repairs on the cottage. I painted the front door a bright, cheerful red, the color my grandmother had always wanted. I planted new flowers in the garden, tulips and daisies and the roses my mom had brought. I hung photos on the walls, old photos of my grandparents, new photos of the life I was building. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at everything I'd done, and I felt something shift inside me. Not sadness, not grief. Something lighter, warmer. Peace. I thought about the penthouse, the lockbox, the letters, the journal. I thought about my parents, sitting in their house, learning how to be a family again. I thought about my grandfather, who'd spent his whole life preparing for this moment. And I thought about myself. The girl who'd grown up feeling invisible, who'd spent years trying to prove her worth to people who couldn't see it. She was still there, somewhere, but she was smaller now. Quieter. The woman standing in the cottage was someone new. I stepped out onto the porch and looked at the maple tree, its leaves already sta rooting to turn gold. The sun was warm on my face, and the air smelled like fresh paint and soil and roses. I touched the necklace, the red thread still soft against my skin. Thank you, I whispered into the wind. I'll keep going. And I did. The thing about grief is that it doesn't follow a schedule. For weeks after the funeral, I thought I was fine. I woke up every morning, went to work, came home, worked on the cottage. I was busy, productive, the kind of busy that makes you feel like you're healing even when you're just running in place. But then, on a random Tuesday, I found myself standing in the penthouse kitchen, sta ring at the copper pots hanging above the island, and I couldn't move. They were the same pots he'd used to make me pancakes. The same ones he'd banged together on New Year's Eve when I was 7, pretending they were symbols. I could still hear the clang, see the way he'd grinned at me, flower SMEA red across his cheek that I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried for the first time since he died. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't quiet. It was the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and primal, the kind that leaves you gasping for air and wiping your nose on your sleeve. I cried for all the years I'd wasted being angry at my parents. I cried for the days I'd skipped visiting him because I was too tired or too busy. I cried because he was gone, and I would never hear his voice again, never feel his hand squeeze mine, never see that crooked smile he saved just for me. And then I stopped. I pulled myself off the floor, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at myself in the reflection of the copper pot. My eyes were red, my cheeks blotchy. I looked like a mess. But I also looked like someone who was still standing. That's when I decided to do something I'd been avoiding. I called my parents. My mom answered on the second ring, her voice worry like she was bracing for bad news. Roro, is everything okay? I need your help, I said. With the penthouse. I can't do it alone. There was a pause. I heard her breathing, the faint sound of my dad's voice in the background asking who it was. Then she said, we'll be there tomorrow. They showed up at 10 in the morning, both of them, wearing old clothes and looking nervous. My mom had a box of donuts in one hand and a bucket of cleaning supplies in the other. My dad carried a toolbox and a thermos of coffee. We stood in the hallway, the three of us, looking at each other like strangers at a reunion. Then my mom shoved the donuts at me and said, we're not staying for lunch, so don't get any ideas. I laughed. It was a small laugh, rusty and uncertain, but it was real. She smiled back, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. We spent the day going through the penthouse. My mom sorted through the kitchen cabinets, packing up dishes and old spices. My dad checked the plumbing and the electrical, muttering about faulty wiring and outdated fixtures. I tackled the study, boxing up books and papers and the hundreds of family photos my grandfather had kept. At first, we worked in separate rooms, each lost in our own silence. But as the hours passed, we root drifting together. My mom found a box of old Christmas ornaments and called us over to look at them. My dad found a stack of vinyl records and root playing them on the old turntable in the corner. Sinatra filled the apartment, and suddenly we were laughing, my mom pretending to dance with a broom, my dad tapping his foot. I leaned against the doorframe and watched them. They looked older, softer. The sharp edges that had always existed between us were rooting to round up. My mom caught my eye and stopped dancing. What? Nothing, I said. I'm just glad you're here. Her face softened. She put down the broom and walked over to me, her hand reaching out to touch my arm. Roro, I know we haven't. She stopped, struggling for words. I know we failed you. Both of us. I shook my head. You're here now. That's what matters. My dad came up behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. He looked at me, his eyes tired but honest. Your grandfather was a better parent than we ever were, he said. He gave you everything. We just gave you problems. Dad, let me finish. He took a breath. I'm not asking you to forgive us. I'm asking you to let us try. That's all. Just let us try. I looked at both of them, standing there in the middle of my grandfather's apartment, surrounded by his things and his memory. They looked so vulnerable, so fragile. I saw them not as the parents who'd hurt me, but as the people they were, flawed, struggling, trying to find their way. Okay, I said. Let's try. We went back to work after that, but the silence was different. Lighter. My mom root asking me questions about the cottage, about my plans, about the garden. My dad offered to help with the roof repairs, said he'd done it before when he was young. I told them about the journal I'd found, the one my grandfather had kept, and they listened without interrupting. When we stopped for lunch, we sat on the floor of the living room, eating donuts and drinking coffee from paper cups. The city sprawled below us, shimmering in the afternoon sun, and I thought about how many times my grandfather had sat in this exact spot, looking out at the same view. He loved this place, my mom said softly. He used to tell me that the view made him feel small. Not in a bad way, he said. In a way that reminded him there was always something bigger. He never told me that, I said that he didn't tell anyone. He wasn't the type. She smiled, a sad little smile. But he showed it. Every time he let someone into his home, every time he made a meal for a neighbor, every time he put you first. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw the daughter who'd lost her father. The grief was there, buried under years of resentment and disappointment, but it was real. She had loved him. She just hadn't known how to show it. We finished the penthouse in 3 days. My dad fixed the leaky faucet in the master bathroom, and my mom packed up the kitchen, saving the things I wanted and donating the rest. I spent most of my time in the study, organizing the books and the photos and the endless papers my grandfather had accumulated over a lifetime. On the last day, we sat in the empty living room. The furniture was gone, the art taken down, the books packed away. Only the view remained, that endless stretch of city and sky. My mom looked around and said, "I'm going to miss it." "Me too," I said. "But it's not really gone. It's just moving." She nodded, and I knew she understood. After they left, I stayed for a while longer. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The penthouse felt different now, stripped of its familiar things. It was just a space, a beautiful shell. But the memories were still here, imprinted on the walls and the windows and the air itself. I stopped in the study, where the bookshelf had been. The hidden alcove was still there, the lockbox gone but the space still visible. I ran my hand along the wooden shelf where the box had sat, and I said a quiet goodbye. Then I locked up, took the elevator down, and walked out onto the street. The city was bustling, loud and alive, and I stepped into it without looking back. The cottage became my anchor. I moved in officially, sleeping in the small bedroom with its creaky window and patchy wallpaper. I planted a vegetable garden in the back, tomatoes and peppers and the herbs my grandfather had always grown on his windowsill. I painted the room a soft blue and turned it into a writing space, a place where I could sit and think and remember. My parents came by more often. My mom would bring casseroles and stay to help with the garden. My dad would show up with his toolbox and find things to fix. They didn't stay overnight, not yet, but they stayed longer each time. The silences between us grew shorter, and the conversations longer. One evening, I found my mom sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. She looked at peace, her hands resting in her lap, her face soft in the golden light. "Roro," she said, without turning around. "Do you think your grandfather would be proud of us?" I sat down beside her. "I think he already was. He loved you, Mom. He just wanted you to find your way back." She reached over and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. "Thank you," she said. "For not giving up on us." I squeezed her hand back. "I could never give up on you. You're my family." The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. I kept working at the restaurant, but I wrote writing on the side, stories about ordinary people and extraordinary moments. My grandfather's journal had inspired me, the way he'd captured the small details, the little pieces of life that often got overlooked. I thought about him every day. Not with the ache of grief, but with a quiet rmth. I'd find myself smiling at a memory, or laughing at something he would have said. He was still with me, in the garden, in the photos on the walls, in the necklace I never took off. The cottage became a home. Not just a place to live, but a place where I belonged. My parents came for Thanksgiving, and we ate together in the small kitchen, bumping into each other and laughing. My mom brought her famous stuffing, and my dad revered the turkey with a knife he'd borrowed from the penthouse. We sat around the table, eating and talking and pretending we'd always been like this. It wasn't true. There were still wounds, still scars. But they were healing, slowly, in their own time. That night, after they left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear, the air cl, and I could hear the faint sound of music from a neighbor's house. That I touched the necklace and whispered into the arcade, "Thank you, Grandpa, for everything." The wind blew softly through the maple tree, and I closed my eyes. That I was home.